I'm going to get us started because we have a packed program for our hour that we are together. So welcome. Thank you all for coming to this conversation about tech policy for a just future, AI, racial equity, and democracy, which we at the law school's Edley Center on Law and Democracy are delighted to co-sponsor with Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. I'm Catherine Lhamon. I'm Executive Director of the Edley Center, and I look forward to moderating our terrific panel today. Just to say, in the true spirit of democracy, we hope and expect that you all will be active participants in the conversation, and that means I hope that you will write down on note cards passed around at the start and continuing to be passed around any questions that you have for our spectacular panelists, and the staff will give those to us, and then I will incorporate them in the Q&A, which will be about halfway through, so start with your questions now, and recognize this is your chance to be participatory in this democracy conversation also. We'll start the conversation with a presentation from Professor Spencer Overton, who will be drawing from his forthcoming article, Ethno-Nationalism by Algorithm. Professor Overton directs the George Washington University School of Law Multiracial Democracy Project. And in addition, he is the Patricia Roberts Harris Research Professor of Law at GWU. And he's written the book with the provocative title, Stealing Democracy, The New Politics of Voter Suppression, in addition to many articles exploring the intersections of race and democracy, including as particularly relevant here, overcoming racial harms to democracy from artificial intelligence. Following his presentation, I will moderate a discussion on technology, racial justice, and democratic governance with Professor Overton and with Larry Norden, who is at the moment a lecturer here at Berkeley Law and also a democracy policy fellow at the Goldman School. And when he's not with us, which he should always be with us, he is vice president of the Elections and Government Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law. And in 2024, he served on Aspen Digital's AI Elections Advisory Council, and he currently serves on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission's Board of Advisors. So without more, please join me in warmly welcoming both of our speakers and listening to Spencer Overton.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. Honored to be here with two good friends and civil rights leaders in terms of Larry Norden and Catherine Lhamon. Just a quick note on Catherine. You all already probably know this, but I mean, she is really a superstar nationally and internationally here. I was just meeting with your dean earlier today, and he was, you know, right after the election, reaching out to her, excited. And this is already a great place. It's an even better place in terms of her being here, in terms of leading the Edley Center. And I'm looking forward to partnering with you on various projects here. Also appreciative of the great folks at Goldman School of Public Policy here. Goldman, thank you. You know, David Wilson has been a friend for a long time, and just really appreciate your all's leadership and help in terms of this. Finally, just before I get started, really, I got just a personal matter. Chris Edley, he was a friend, he was a mentor. He really embodied who I wanted to be as like an academic, civil rights leader, and a policy person. That was his combination, and I looked up to it. You know, I took over the Joint Center, which is America's Black think tank. His father actually helped start it when his father was at the Ford Foundation, gave the initial grant for this organization. And when I came out here, whenever I'd come out here, I'd meet with Chris regularly to basically talk about how do we rebuild this organization and bring it to the present. And he's just a great friend. I miss him deeply. I'm so glad this center bears his name, and you know, just has so much respect for both Chris and Maria, and so great to be here. So now, we talked about Ethno-Nationalism by Algorithm, the working title of the piece that I'm working on. It argues that AI is not simply a technical domain, but has become a central front in the political contest over the meaning of American identity, American democracy. In part one of the paper, I trace how ethno-nationalism has shaped U.S. law and policy and how the second Trump administration has revived and extended this legacy. Now, what do I mean when I say ethno-nationalism, right? I mean a political ideology that reserves democracy for members of a dominant racial, ethnic, or cultural group while attempting to either exclude or assimilate others. From the founding, ethno-nationalism has shaped American law. We know, Constitution protected slavery. The Naturalization Act of 1790 limited naturalized citizenship to, quote, free white persons, end of quote, thereby gerrymandering our population to create racial democratic majorities that persist to this day. The federal government subsidized conquest and erasure of native languages, religion, culture, sanctioned Asian exclusion through immigration laws and alien land laws. My argument is that in the 1960s, we started to shift to become a truly multiracial democracy. We all know in terms of the Voting Rights Act, in terms of opening doors, but I think just as important was the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 that prohibited discrimination and racial discrimination in immigration here. Back then in 1960, or in the 60s, let's say, people of color made up about 15% of the population. Nationally, they're over 40% today, a large part due to that law. House has changed. Back in 1960, U.S. House was 3% people of color. Now it is 28%. But there has been a backlash. And this backlash, I don't think it's just uniquely American. If you go to places in terms of Europe, Brazil, India even, right? There is a nativism that exists here in the United States. We see a backlash in terms of some Americans believing they have lost a power status here. And my argument is that the Trump administration has embraced this and taken this backlash to a new level in terms of policy prescription. So in just 6 months, it's eliminated chief diversity officer positions, eliminated equity action plans in the government, eliminated equity-related grants and contracts across federal agencies. It's dismantled or defunded the Minority Business Development Agency, EPA's Office of Environmental Justice, and the Digital Equity Broadband Program. It directed the Smithsonian, the National Park Service, to strip exhibits that acknowledge the histories of slavery, indigenous dispossession, systemic racism, framing such narratives as divisive and anti-American. It's ordered the restoration of Confederate monuments, renamed military bases back to their Confederate designations, and mandated patriotic education in federally funded schools and teacher training programs, while banning what it labels as, quote, discriminatory equity ideology, end of quote. It revoked longstanding requirements that agencies provide language access to individuals with limited English proficiency, and asserted that English, for the first time on the federal level, pronounced English was the nation's sole official language here. On immigration, it sought to reinterpret the 14th Amendment to deny birthright citizenship to many children of non-citizens, and it suspended the admission of refugees. In the last couple of years, 95% of refugees come from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But then it carved out exemptions for white Afrikaner immigrants from South Africa. Now, my argument is these actions aren't isolated. They reflect a coherent cultural project here about dominance here and to marginalize pluralism and difference. Even as this perspective invokes colorblindness, the administration advances a vision in which cultural assimilation is a national imperative, and where racial diversity is no longer a public good. I believe that these principles, this approach, also shapes the administration's approach to AI governance. Now, before we kind of turn to that, I just want to explain how unregulated AI can advance ethno-nationalist objectives. Most of us are familiar with AI bias, like bias in credit scoring, criminal justice, risk assessments, hiring platforms, facial recognition, right? We've seen that, we're familiar with that. I think something that's less appreciated is what I call homogenization, or the pluralism problem with language models. Basically, these function as averaging machines, and they optimize for dominant patterns. The result is really a suppression of dialects, erasure of minority cultures, privileging of dominant narratives here. We've seen this in the past in terms of conquest from different communities. There's a concern that AI will accelerate that. Racially targeted deceptive practices ranging from paper flyers to Russians setting up fake Facebook pages, right? Discouraging black voter turnout. They've long been a part of our country. Generative AI expands the opportunity for more of that. Behavioral manipulation is also a danger. Chatbots have the capacity to collect data, right, and then use that data about a user to produce content, to persuade, to push, to nudge that user into different approaches. And this could be used to advance ethno-nationalism. Now, without policy safeguards, the point is AI can pose a real danger. Unfortunately, day one, January 20th, the Trump administration rescinded a Biden AI order that required agencies to mitigate algorithmic discrimination. 3 days later, the administration revoked, 3 days later after that, after revoking, Trump issued his own EO called, quote, Removing Barriers to American Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. So rather than kind of replacing the prior framework, it just repudiated it entirely. It declared America's priority to be sustaining America's global AI dominance and instructed agencies to eliminate any safeguards that might slow down development. So it made no reference to discrimination, equity, civil rights. It cast fairness requirements as, quote, ideological bias that was an obstacle to innovation. 6 months later, came out with a couple more pronouncements, 2 more big documents. One was an AI action plan, and it proposed withholding federal funding from states with burdensome AI regulation. So in practice, this could disqualify states like California and Colorado from federal funds merely for enforcing their state laws against AI bias, right? Just as telling are the omissions, plan makes no mention of language access, despite AI's potential to provide for real-time translation to, over 27 million people who live in the United States who are limited in their English proficiency. Half of those people are US citizens, and about 8 million people are voting age US citizens who are limited in their English proficiency. The AI plan does not acknowledge algorithmic discrimination at all. In fact, the word discrimination is absent. There was a second document released at that same time called, quote, Preventing Woke AI in the Federal Government. Does even more work, and basically explicitly condemns diversity, equity, and inclusion as an existential threat to trustworthy AI, kind of the background story. So much policy is driven by stories, right? So Google had some problems. Basically, their image tool that identified images and labeled them, doing things like labeling black people as gorillas, right? Or they had an issue where you put in white girls and on a search and some young children come up, you put in black girls and pornographic images come up. They recognized that they had a problem. And so they engaged in fine tuning in terms of their AI. Back then it was BART, now it's called Gemini here, right? So they did that. As a result, the AI created an image of George Washington that was, looked like a Hamilton, the play Hamilton, George Washington. It was a black George Washington. And some people were up in arms about AI misleading the past and this is a huge problem, and this is a problem with woke AI. Now, let's just put aside that the tool was immediately disabled and was fixed, so it wouldn't happen again. Let's put all that aside. But that necessitated this pronouncement in this EO that said, if you fine-tune your AI to reduce bias, the federal government won't buy it. It's basically a procurement piece that prevents innovation, prevents people from trying to improve and trying to make AI better and stronger here. These policies were operationalized throughout the government. EEOC removed its May 2023 guidance explaining how Title VII applies to algorithmic hiring tools. Department of Labor withdrew requirements that federal contractors test AI tools for discriminatory outcomes in hiring, promotion, and termination. HUD rescinded some safeguards against racially biased automated appraisal models. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau revoked fair lending rules that creditors provide specific and accurate explanations for algorithmic credit decisions here. There were some similar changes at NIST here, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in terms of no longer funding and supporting research disaggregated by race, et cetera here. So cumulative effect is profound. There's a lot more that's there. And this shift, it's not even a shift against like Biden. It's like a huge shift from Trump 1. Trump 1 at least acknowledged civil rights in terms of its AI policy and bias here. So to address these problems, I propose an equitable AI in government act. I'm not going to get that much into it. Basically, it prevents government from using facial recognition technologies unless it's been proved as non-discriminatory, prohibits government from using AI for behavioral manipulation, and apply some heightened standards to high-risk uses of AI in healthcare, credit, law enforcement, voting, et cetera. So now, just in closing, I think we've got to realize that, yeah, we're living through this moment of incredible technological transformation. That's absolutely right? But also profound demographic change. Ethno-nationalism is one path. Belonging is narrowly defined, and using AI as a tool of exclusion is on the table. But there's another path that's possible. It's a path that embraces pluralism, ensures that new technologies reflect the full diversity of the American people. And I'd say that's the project of reimagining AI law as central to racially inclusive democracy. Thank you.
So I'm excited about leading us along the path to a fully racially inclusive democracy. That is a nice way to end and begin where we go next. I'm going to just start with a question for Larry and just remind you all that if you want to use your voice in this conversation, the note cards are the way to do it, and send us your questions. Otherwise, it'll just be our voices. But Larry, Secretary, you have co-authored a literal book on how to use AI to strengthen democracy in your life at the Brennan Center. So I hope that you can give us a little information about what you think is possible and required for using AI in that way.
Yeah, happy to. And before I answer that question, Catherine, I did want to also thank the Goldman School, Emma Law School. I want to say I just got here a few weeks ago, and when I reached out to the Goldman School to say Spencer Overton is coming to town, he has a really interesting article that I think people should hear about. Just in the way they have been with everything when I've reached out, they were so welcoming and got right on it to put this event together. So I want to thank them and to thank the law school. And I did not have the same personal relationship with Chris Edley that the two of you did, but he was a great friend to the Brennan Center. Catherine, I just want to say I was thrilled to see that you will be leading the center, and it's a real boon for Berkeley and the community. So to answer your question, maybe I'll just I'll start by just giving a little quickly background on the Brennan Center. We are based at NYU, and we're a think tank and legal institute that is devoted to promoting the values of democracy. I lead a team, the Elections and Government program at the Brennan Center. It's about 30 folks. The Brennan Center, I started the Brennan Center, it was about 30 folks. It's now about 200. And as the name implies, we elections and government, we focus a lot on elections, right? So that's election administration, that's election security, that's money, campaign finance, money in politics, all these things, how they impact our elections. More recently, we've been focused on election misinformation, foreign interference, more recent challenges. In the 15 to 20 years that I've been working on this stuff, technology has had an incredible impact on elections, right? From the Help America Vote Act in 2004, computerizing everything, to more recently seeing, cyber attacks against our election systems, and the use of social media to help foreign governments interfere in our elections like we haven't seen before. So in November 2022, just after the 2022 election, ChatGPT 3.0 came out, and one of my colleagues was playing with it and said, I think this is gonna have a huge impact on our elections and democracy. We should look into this. And so we had the experience of reaching out to technical experts in the past and decided to do the same thing. So we partnered with the Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technologies, who had done a lot of work on AI. And we said, we want to understand how this is going to affect elections. And so a lot of, many of the recommendations that are in the document that you referred to, Catherine, are very focused on the mechanics of elections, right? Like the first things we were looking at, and Spencer and I have had this conversation a little bit, I think we kind of approached it the same way at first. How is this gonna help? How is this gonna harm? Things that we know about to help us just understand, right? So we were looking at things like deepfakes and of political candidates and political communications. What would that do to the information environment? What could some remedies be? We were looking at how it might impact election security, how it could impact election administration, right? There are lots of very positive ways, potentially, that AI could make elections run better. We could learn more about our elections when they fail. We could translate things for different communities. Voter suppression, obviously, also something, a lot of focus on how AI could enhance voter suppression. And so there are recommendations about all of these specific things, but the longer we worked on this, the more it became apparent that there were bigger, and a lot of this overlaps with what Spencer had talked about, but bigger threats to our democracy from AI. So while we have very specific recommendations about election security and administration, and we think that there should be guidance for election officials and how to use AI, to be very careful that they're not inadvertently suppressing votes. The bigger recommendations in the front cover a few things. One is some of what Spencer just talked about, the public use of AI, and this was a Biden administration strategy. How can we use the government's use of AI to foment best practices, get some guidance for the rest of the field, maybe nudge AI companies to be considering things like bias and the homogenization that Spencer talked about. I also came to believe, and this is reflected in the document, transparency from these companies is incredibly important from AI developers. What's going in, and Spencer, I think spoke very well about the impact of what's going in on what comes out, and having auditing of these systems to see the way they are disparately impacting communities. Accountability is a really big issue, and being able to hold companies accountable for harms that they should be anticipating, to have some kind of reasonable care. And I have come to believe that data privacy is critical in all of this. When Spencer talks about manipulation of people, a lot of that is only possible through the data that they are collecting. And we really do need to have comprehensive data privacy legislation passed in this country. So those are the kind of main areas that we covered. I will say, we wrote this report before the 2024 election. And so my views on what needs to happen have evolved since then, and I'm still working them out. But I am a little bit less certain that we want to be using federal agencies to be nudging, because I think actually, what Spencer is talking about, non-regulation, it's not, a lot of the things that he talked about that Trump has done or initially did, you might not be unusual for a Republican administration, certainly getting rid of all the Biden EOs, right? Like, that's kind of typical. It's gone a step further. It's not just non-regulation now. It is actively trying to push this ethno-nationalistic and authoritarian, and I think the two are quite linked, agenda. So not sure about that, but I think we need to be thinking about, maybe we need to start thinking about antitrust as a possible solution. And I'm still working all of these thoughts out. But alternative sources of information for people, one of the things that I'm very concerned about is just that it will impact not just rights, which is obviously a very big deal, but the way we all see the world, right? Social media has had a massive impact on the way we see the world. I think AI, it's going to be many-fold of that. And then I'll shut up because I know we have other questions, but I do think we also need to think about where this fits into how our democracy has been failing, and bigger structural democratic reforms, not just AI reforms. I think it's bigger than that.
So, Larry, you just talked to us about the ways that government can nudge for good and is now nudging in ways that you're concerned about. I think, Spencer, you highlighted some deep concerns about what is coming already from the ways that the current administration is nudging. And Spencer, you pointed out that the executive actions in this administration are about procurement and about the dollars, the ways that the federal government will buy use of AI. Do we live in an, can we have some hope is what I'm going to. Can you both give us some hope? But do we live in a time when we can buy our way out of it? We don't have to rely on the federal procurement, and there's a way not to be so reliant on federal nudging. Can you both, I know you're thinking out loud about it, and this is new for you because it's different from where you were pre-2024 election, but maybe we can think together about what's possible, and if you could both speak to whether you think there's a way forward, notwithstanding the existing executive actions. I'd appreciate it.
Well, I definitely think that there's a way forward, and I just also want to apologize. And I want to apologize for not acknowledging Professor Sonia Katyal here. I mean, her work is so outstanding and influential in this. I mean, like, I can't write something without citing her, honestly, here. So we just appreciate you and your many contributions in terms of, you know, civil rights, technology, just incredibly important. So I do think that there are some lovers, and I do think that there is hope here. Number one, folks might immediately say, well, if we can't do anything in the federal government in the next 2 or 3 years, then hey, let's go work on some other problems. I think to figure out what the big solutions are, you need time to figure that out, for different groups to get together and figure out, you know, if one could say, what's the perfect system, that takes some time to do, right? And so state work, local work in terms of procurement, I think all of that is important. Engaging companies directly, kind of one-on-one, and having some exposure here with regard to companies, I think all of that is incredibly important, in part because I think that companies do feel like they're under the microscope by the administration, right? They feel like they've got this front row seat. Everything they do is being examined by this administration, and kind of having a little bit of a counter push. There's some other factors here, as you all know, in terms of the Brussels effect and the European Union playing a leading role. So I just don't believe that one should throw in the towel. Now, I do think that folks who believe in a strong multiracial democracy need to be engaged in this space. I think that civil rights community, there could be more infrastructure built and expertise developed to deal with these issues. So certainly there are some things that need to be done from an infrastructure side as well.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just echo a few things that Spencer said. I do think the state laboratory of democracy route is very important, and I think the other side, if I can call them that, recognizes that as well, which is why, you know, there was this effort in Congress. It failed.
Oh, just a second. I'm
yeah.
sorry. And when you say the other side, I don't think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think you're saying anything that's partisan.
No, I'm
you're
not.
saying something that is
Absolutely.
folks who believe in pluralism and are on one side,
yeah,
and there are
right.
people of all different backgrounds who believe in civil rights and pluralism, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then there are other folks who are kind of feeling cultural anxiety and want to kind of impose one vision on the world of it. And that, I think, is the other side as opposed to anything else.
Thank you for
Correct me if I'm
clarifying that,
wrong.
Spencer. No, you are correct. That is certainly what I meant. I did not mean that in a partisan way. But there was this effort, and supported by a lot of the tech companies, to in Congress in the passage of the last budget to put a moratorium on the ability of states to pass or enforce any rules on AI, right? And there's been from the Trump administration this as well, right? A threat. I don't know that it necessarily has any teeth, but to withhold funds based on what they call overregulation of AI. So that's a critical fight. And advocates who worked in the space won it in Congress, but that's going to keep coming back.
Clearly, I mean, the House passed it,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
then the Senate, they blocked it.
And I don't think, you know, Ted Cruz has another idea around that is similar. So I think that's going to keep coming back. I agree on the engaging companies, something that's, having been in this space for a little while, seeing how companies move with the political winds, it can be dispiriting, but I think it's important to remember that, you know, wherever they seem to be now, with the right amount of pressure, they may move back. And, you know, it's a different example, but it's all related. The whole thing with taking Jimmy Kimmel off the air and the backlash is a very kind of similar thing. A lot of the AI companies going into 2024 and a lot of the social media companies were talking about how they wanted to make sure that they protect our elections. They had people that were hired in kind of with elections in their title. a lot of them have gotten rid of those positions since the election. There needs to be a pushback against that, right? The issues are the same, and there can't just be sticks from one side. So the public has a lot of power in all of this. And the last thing I just wanted to say, to echo what Spencer said, is I think too often the folks who work in what I would call like the democracy space and civil rights are too siloed. And technology and the media are so linked to democracy. And again, how we see the world, we haven't even talked about this, but whether we're surveilled. And I think there needs to be a better understanding of tech in particular, of AI. And I also think, because often it's just kind of missing from the conversation, and for folks who are working on AI, understanding the democratic implications of that is so important as well.
Yes, okay.
So when I was at the Joint Center, I had a little tension with some of my staff members, right? Some of them didn't want to work with companies because they felt like they're not really interested in us. They don't really care. They'll sell us down the river, right? I look at companies like government. Like government, you're trying to influence and get government to do the right thing. Companies, I think it's the same thing. If you look at just the Fortune 500 and their contribution to the GDP, it's much more significant than the federal budget here. And they just have so much power in terms of shaping our lives, whether it's as consumers or employees or whatever. So I just would urge people, whatever their politics are, no matter how kind of left or right you are, I just think companies are an important part of this conversation, and they are ignored to the peril of folks who are committed to multiracial democracy.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up on that with both of your comments on some questions from the audience, and I love they're coming in fast and furious, so I'm going to start asking them a couple at a time, I think, to make sure we have time for all of them. But someone noted that President Trump recently organized a dinner with big tech CEOs at the White House, and asks if that could be a threat to democracy. And so, following on your last comments, I'd like to hear what you think about that. And Larry, you were talking about nudging companies, and
Yeah.
certainly well, don't answer yet, because I have another question too. But certainly the president's interested in nudging companies. And then another question is, and I hope you all know what this means, but how is ethno-nationalism different from Jim Code as proposed by Ruha Benjamin? So,
As proposed, sorry.
by Ruha Benjamin, the person who
Why don't you answer the first question?
Yeah.
okay, you
Sounds
talk.
good. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's a threat to democracy. The way I think about some of the unique factors that got us to this moment, I think there are three things that make it particularly difficult. One is the power of the presidency right now, and in large measure, that's what the Supreme Court has given the presidency very recently, and kind of putting our checks and balances totally out of whack. And part of it is just we have a president right now who has broken all norms, is incredibly transactional, and I think that's going to be difficult to put that genie back in the bottle. So that's one thing. The second is just the incredible corruption, particularly in that office, in a way that we haven't seen probably ever. And again, Supreme Court, I would say, Citizens United, many other decisions, it has a lot of responsibility for that. And then the third is the outsized power right now of tech companies and a few oligarchs. And that combination is combustible, I think, and is extremely dangerous for a democracy. And part of that is income inequality. It goes and wealth inequality, but I think it goes beyond that. But I think it is extremely dangerous that right now you have an executive branch that can use its power over these massive corporations, and that in fact, some of those tech leaders, if not sympathetic, and some of them may be to this ethno-nationalist product, they control so much, or at least have indicated that they're willing to play this game, where to be pressured for certain results. And I want to make one more point, which is, and this was not, Spencer didn't really, I think you didn't cover this in your article, and I don't know if it's because it was too speculative, but David Karpf had a piece in The Atlantic yesterday where he made the point that what is particularly dangerous about having so much power in a small number of people, these AI companies, social media companies, is not just their ability to shape how we see the world, but their ability to surveil us, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just manipulation. And when if those individuals are especially close to a presidential administration that has shown itself to be corrupt and to want to go after political enemies, that is also a very scary combination in terms of the ability to surveil and crack down on political opponents.
Mm-hmm. And I think also that does not only scare people who are in the U.S., I think it scares people mm-hmm. around the world. So when we talk about global AI dominance, I don't know that we're doing ourselves any favor, because I think that people want some digital sovereignty. I think they want their culture protected, and I think they feel as though, frankly, we're on the take, because these are our companies, and so we'll do whatever to make them dominant and not regulate them, et cetera. So Ruha Benjamin, the new Jim Code here, or what she calls Jim Code, I think I'm very inspired by her work here. So it's similar in the sense that I'm inspired by her. I also, she's not an AI optimist or pessimist. She believes that we make decisions and that we can control both the technology and the law, and it's about the decisions we make. And I'm completely with her in terms of that. If there's a difference, I think it would be, I definitely focus on history and where we are in our context, in our racial history, but I really do believe this ethno-nationalism is a worldwide phenomenon. If you look again at Germany and the rise of AfD and you know, J.D. Vance meeting with the leader of AfD and saying, hey, we can put the Nazi stuff in the past and, you know, protect Germans in Germany and kind of be nativist and anti-immigrant. This is something that's around the world. And when I was in Germany and I talked to people about, well, what are you going to do about this? Their response, it sounded like Democrats here, like going down this bullet point of why AfD is wrong, as opposed to a real strategy about what's a pluralistic society that is inclusive and incorporates, you know, all different types of people in terms of background here. So I think that this, looking at it past kind of a discrimination or even a past systemic discrimination and thinking about where are we now and where are we going and how do we grapple with this cultural anxiety in terms of creating a multiracial democracy, not just where Latino and Black folks in LA can share power, right? But also where kind of everybody has a seat at the table and we're kind of navigating. So I think that might be a contribution or something that's a little different.
Great. I'm going to now ask 3 questions together
Okay,
because it's sort of related and we're short on time. One, people are looking for hope. So could good AI help us draw better congressional districts? What might be unintended consequences and downstream risks? Also, do you have examples of promising positive uses of AI to strengthen democracy despite the political environment? And alternately, what do you most fear heading into the next elections? And I'll just point out, I'm not sure which election the questioner was asking about, but we have a consequential election here in California in November. So it could be very soon, could be shortly thereafter. Go.
All right. So I guess on examples of hope, I have seen AI used for good. Again, my focus is elections. Particularly in the space of election administration, I think there's a lot of promise there. I think there's also promise in terms of, well, let me start with that. Spencer talked about the ability to reach non-English speakers in the United States. AI, there's tremendous promise there, right? There is tremendous promise, and I've seen election officials start to do this. AI is very good at recognizing patterns, figuring out when something went wrong. There were long lines, and there have repeatedly been long lines at certain polling places. Why is that? What patterns can we see in the problems? How can we find polling places that are closer to public transportation? There are a whole number of things in the election administration space. I think as with anything with AI, we've got to be really careful, and there needs to be guidance for election officials, but they're incredibly under-resourced, right? You're often talking about people who have like one person in the office, them, and they have 5 other jobs, and they also are supposed to be running our elections and maintaining voter registration rolls. It's just a very challenging job, and there's some really good work in giving election officials some ideas and guidance right now to make elections better. I'm trying to remember, there was another example that I was going to give in terms of, and now I'm forgetting what it was, I should have written it down, in terms of AI, but I'll probably remember after Spencer has a chance to talk, but I will say in terms of my fears going into the next election, whether it's 25, 26, or 28, is less about, I'll just be honest, is less about AI and emerging technologies. I can imagine AI being used for lots of bad things, lots of bad data analysis to make false claims about non-citizens voting, things like that. But my biggest fear is just federal interference in the running of our elections. I'll just be honest, that's the big thing right now. Are we going to see, because there have been plenty of indications in the past that the president would like to do things like this, are we going to see deployment of National Guard or ICE around elections? Are we going to see the seizing of voting equipment or the attempt to seize ballot boxes when counting is still happening? I think those are the things, in the very short term, I'm less worried about in terms of interference in elections. AI playing a role is just, bad actions from the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And Spencer, before you answer, I'll just note in your paper, you talked about the ways that AI can be used and is particularly effective at suppressing votes from people of color. And so I wonder if you have the same universe of worries and not worries, or if you could speak to that issue too.
Sure, and I'm also going to do a commercial.
Okay.
And this is going to be a commercial for myself as a scholar, but then also the Brennan Center, since I rely so much on their work here, right? So I've got a couple of pieces. The first piece I did a couple of years ago was harms of AI to multiracial democracy, and I really tried to chronicle some of those harms. I think kind of popular opinion is deception in terms of generative AI, and I think that's definitely an issue. But there are other issues. We've talked about kind of, in 400 counties in the United States, people of color are in the majority, right? And if you were to target election officials in those particular counties, and whether it's with mass record requests that have been not just a copy and paste where you can easily detect that they're identical, but are unique as a result of generative AI, that could kind of gum up the works a bit. We've talked about bias, and are some of these tools bias, whether it's signature verification on mail ballots or registration rolls in terms of identifying folks that shouldn't be on the rolls. So Brennan Center's done a lot of that. This piece lifts it up. And to add one more piece, part of it is what the federal government may do. Part of it is scaling back on entities like CISA, right?
Yep.
Just like you say, we're going to take away your Secret Service to make you vulnerable. Like, hey, we're going to roll back on these entities that inform election officials about attacks, cyber attacks, et cetera. Okay, so that's the harms piece. Subsequent, all this stuff is at SSRN, by the way. You know, Spencer Overton, SSRN, right? The other piece is about benefits, right? And in that piece, I basically say, I don't agree with the AI optimists that basically say, this is all sugar and spice and everything is gonna be great for everybody here, right? Like that's a marketing ploy here, right? But I'm not in the camp of the AI pessimists who say every application is bad. There are some that are good, and folks who want to see an inclusive society, they disadvantage themselves and their cause if they ignore these benefits. So when we talk about community mobilization and we talk about, you know, generating content and sentiment analysis and those people who don't respond to polls who are in your membership base and kind of figuring out where they are. You know, there are a lot of language assistance you mentioned, you know, audits after elections by election officials who often, administrators who don't have time to do the audits. A lot of that is chronicled in that piece. So there are definitely good and bad applications.
Yeah, I did remember what I was going to say. I'll just add that we do have examples, and I assigned a reading to my class, my last class, where AI has been used to help mobilize people and to help them understand some really complicated political issues, right? So in Kenya, there was like a finance bill that impacted everybody. It was really complicated, and activists were able to use AI to help people understand how the different provisions in that bill would impact their personal finances, and also who was benefiting, and to communicate with each other. And it, you know, it reminded me very much of like the hope around social media and the Arab Spring. We had somebody in the first class that I had who worked in trust and safety for Facebook and talked about how when he came to Facebook to do this work, it was just after the Arab Spring, and he thought this is going to be the great organizing tool. It can help be an equalizer. And I think AI has a lot of that potential too, right? People have a really hard time. Our bureaucracy can be so challenging. Our legal system can be so challenging. There's a lot of potential for AI being an equalizer for folks. But it's not going to just happen. And these companies aren't, I mean, we saw from what happened with social media, frankly, that unless they are incentivized to make that a priority, it's going to fall by the wayside to other things like making money. So to circle back to a point that Spencer made earlier, that's why we can't just give up on these companies. I think we need to continue to have pressure on them to see democracy as a value that the public has, and if they're going to make money, they need to support democracy.
And we're going to get to more questions, but it's certainly not inevitable. We have to consciously, you know, create these applications and deploy these applications, right? It's not inevitable is the first big piece. And then, you know, just quickly, in the private sector, I think we always think about people being cut as a result of AI here, like, oh, these extensive labor costs and, you know, people will be cut. I think the challenge in the nonprofit sector is one that is different. I don't think it is, we're not trying to make a profit. It's we've got finite resources and we can't do more with these finite resources. So if we can use these tools to do more with these finite resources, I think that's a good and that we should embrace it as opposed to fearing that it's going to lead to a lot of displacement in the nonprofit sector.
Spoken like a true nonprofit leader. I love that. What more can we do? Okay, I'm going to ask the last three questions, and I hope you all will think also of this time as your chance to use your closing remarks because we're coming to an end. One is Marcus Dubber writes about the founding of the United States as a shift of police power down one level from the crown to the states. If the republic is built on repression, are its founding documents useful or a hindrance in the pursuit of an inclusive government? And Spencer, I know you actually spent quite a bit of time on that in the paper, so I'm hoping you can come back with that for us. And then the other two, just before I read the last two, I just want to say how amazing it is to be with these big brains up here on this dais and with the big brains in this room on this problem. So I really appreciate the way that all of us are in discussion for the now. These two are current neural network tech often produce untraceable output. You can't identify which node or step generates biased content. So is there a policy solution to this? I hope the answer is yes. And then last is, since AI applications are captive of the data they are fed, there's garbage in, garbage out, which systems do you identify as the best to keep the data from being a problem? Is there clean data toward bias? Is there a way of acknowledging bias, or is there something else? So I'm, again, looking forward to solutions. Yay. You can fix this for us. Spencer, you want to go first?
Sure. I really think that the people who are in this room are like the new founders here. So as opposed to kind of hearkening back to what some people who don't understand our world, who are slaveholders, who are thinking about manifest destiny, there's some things that we can learn from them. But I don't think we should be confined by them in terms of our imagination. The challenges that we talked about earlier that may be happening in Los Angeles in terms of how people share power are just not the same as the mercantile class and the agrarian class sharing power among kind of a narrow group of white males here, right? And so I think you all are going to come up with the solution, and it's not a silver bullet thing where I've got like a single answer to. It's the work of a career, right? I was talking yesterday about if Charles Hamilton Houston were here today, this is the stuff that he would be working on because he would feel like this is what will impact and shape this future country and world. In terms of policy solutions, I certainly recognize the difficulty of AI where, it's not some program where it's always going to come out with the same solution here, et cetera. That's one of the reasons I'm so nervous about retreat from disparate impact. There is not really intent in this context in terms of these machines. And disparate impact is one of the few tools we can determine what are the outputs and are they consistent with what we want to see here. And so I do think disparate impact is an important tool. And it's in jeopardy, not just from the Trump administration, but I think this court, the question is, what is it going to do moving forward in terms of disparate impact? With the bias issue in terms of data, I would simply say that I think one problem is data. I think there's a separate problem that's the pluralism problem in terms of the averaging here. I think with all of these things, there are two different things going on. One is there are technical questions. I'm not a technologist, but there are technical questions that we've got to get to the bottom of. But there are also, and Larry just did a reading on this, he signed a reading, these different concepts of fairness that are out there here. And we've, the very simple example is if you do a picture of CEOs, is that, portrait of various CEOs what the reality is right now? Or is it what it could be in terms of if you had a variety of CEOs here? So what is fairness? What are our goals? What are quality? Those are debates, and those are not just debates for technologists. Those are debates for lawyers. And since this is my last statement here, and the last thing I get to say here, and I may have mentioned this to some other folks, our leading export in this country, really right after the ratification of the Constitution from 1800 to 1860, it was over half of our exports was cotton. We displaced India and China as the world's leading producers of cotton, and like 40 to 45% of Great Britain's exports were textiles. So their economy was dependent on that. And it really made America, right? Our role as a global powerhouse is in part due to the origin story there, right? But there are some negative externalities from that, right? When we talk about chattel slavery, when we talk about displacing tribal nations from Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi to make way for these plantations and the Trail of Tears, right? Lawyers enforced and protected that economic growth as opposed to some other values, right? I think a similar analysis could be said with regard to the Industrial Revolution in the United States. Great, we enjoyed the standard of life
for this history, but we are out of time. Don't leave that clock
I
up there.
got
So
you.
yes,
Moral of the story is there are these negative externalities. There's a role for lawyers in here to create that world. I'm sorry.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so Larry, we're out of time. Less than 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, Larry.
I'll just say the United States has kind of always had this inherent conflict right back to its founding about who we are and what we are. And at the end of the day, I think this is a bigger fight, and it's really all of us when we're talking about tech policy, democracy. It's an information war, and it's a fight over who we are as a country. That is the history of the United States. You have the post-Civil War period where there was a rebirth of understanding of who we are. You had the 1920s, very nativistic period, and it was followed by, World War II and a vast change in the decades that followed into an understanding of our country as a multiracial democracy, and what I would say is the more hopeful vision of the United States. And at the end of the day, all of this, I really believe, comes down to us better communicating our vision of what this country could be, can be, what our ideals are. Not to say it's all a myth, but to say there are many profound words from our founding fathers and others that that should guide us. To be a multiracial democracy, to be a place for equal justice, to be a country of the rule of law, and we need to be making that case. And that actually really fits into the entire fight, whether we're talking about AI and ethno-nationalism or just what kind of a democracy we are.
So thank you to my terrific guests, and thank you to all of you for coming, and let's move forward in this fight. Okay.